Mr. President, I take the opportunity of wishing the East European cities well in the coming of the very early skiing season, and snow and ice that's come there, what of course is indicative of the fact that, as independent science has now confirmed, that the globe is actually cooling and has been cooling since 2002, broadly flat since 1998. We're all talking about something here which isn't happening. I've heard time and time again members here talk of CO2 as a pollutant. A pollutant is a life-giving natural gas. It gives me the impression that some of our members haven't had the benefit of a formal education. Isn't this really just about the state being able to get its hand in ordinary people's trouser pocket to steal yet more tax from them? Isn't this all about political control? Isn't all this about politics and big business? The whole thing's a sham. This bogus hypothesis, this ridiculous nonsense that man-made CO2 is causing global warming. Enough, please, before we damage irrevocably the global economy.
Okay, well, that's Godfrey Bloom. He's an economist, military veteran. He is on the Economic Monetary Affairs Committee for the European Union Parliament and their Environment Committee. And we have him for the rest of the hour. Very honored to have him with us on this Monday, the 28th day of December, 2009, to give us a European Union view of how this unelected bureaucracy just continues to take over more and more of our sovereignty, and how they openly admit this is a tax to control our lives, and in the words of Maurice Strong at the UN, to destroy our industrial society. So to get a view on what just happened in Copenhagen and so much more, and on what's happening with the dollar, the pound, the euro, what's happening with gold, to get a lot of different perspectives, we have Godfrey Bloom, MEP, a member of European Parliament. His website is godfreybloomep.co.uk. Thank you for joining us, sir.
Great pleasure, Alex.
Good to have you here. Well, I just played a brief clip of you in the EU standing up to these people. What is the state of the European Union right now? Are they angry that their full power grab failed? Gordon Brown is saying he doesn't care. He is writing the agreement that the West will pledge money to the IMF and World Bank and UN regardless, to these private bankers. I mean, when does this swindle end?
Well, I'm beginning to wonder, actually. It's extraordinary that I find that I used to think that the United Kingdom and to a certain extent Europe used to follow the United States in a lot of these matters, and I rather fancy now that we are actually slightly ahead of you, and I'm watching America make some of the same mistakes that we've been making since 1945. We've actually handed over our country. The United Kingdom, one of the oldest democracies in the world, has now handed its entire government over to an unelected bureaucracy in Brussels without the will of the British people, without any form of referendum, and without any understanding of what we've been doing. And it's something that's been a conspiracy between all the major parties in the United Kingdom and all the political elements in the European Union. Quite disgraceful, quite horrifying and unbelievable.
Absolutely. Just like U.S. politics, I've studied somewhat the British system, and it's the same thing. Special globalist interests come in, buy off the 2 or 3 or 4 top parties. The parties may fight with each other over power, but not over carrying out their master's agenda. Can you break down how England has been absorbed and never been allowed to have a vote into the European Union, so Americans and Canadians and Mexicans on the North American continent can draw parallels to how by stealth, and that's in the SPP North American Union documents, we're having North American integration, and we're not allowed to have a vote on it either.
Yes, it's quite extraordinary. In 1975, we had a referendum, and we were told it was called something called the Common Market. We were told it was a free trade zone. And of course, being a free economist myself and a global free trader, and I'm a relatively young man at the time in 1975, I voted for it, as a lot of people did, on the basis that we were told quite categorically it wouldn't affect our sovereignty as a nation. It was a free trade area. We'd bring down trade barriers and bureaucracy, and we could all trade with each other and be friends. and we all thought that was a good idea. There was no question of there being political union of any sort. This wasn't on the agenda, and we've seen a sort of salami slicing going on now since 1975, with one treaty after the other, which has taken us towards what we now have, which is a Soviet model. We have a Soviet model. Some people try and pretend it's the United States model, but it isn't. It's a Soviet model where our laws are actually made by an unelected bureaucracy. And I had some of your congressmen over to Brussels who were visiting, and I had the pleasure of meeting them a little while ago, just a few weeks ago, and they were absolutely astounded and horrified that the European Parliament doesn't actually make the law. It's an amending chamber. And so we now have 75% of our laws in England made by an unelected international or European bureaucracy with absolutely no recourse to the British voters. There's no cost-benefit analysis. There's no debate that you would expect to have in our Westminster chamber. And people feel totally powerless. And what's actually happening now is that fewer and fewer people are actually voting at elections because they know it doesn't do any good because their laws are no longer made in London.
Which is what the bureaucrats love. They love people capitulating, going into a sense of apathy. But I have to tell you, your party, the UKIP, the UK Independence Party, is certainly rising, and a lot of people are losing that apathy and finding out that this illegitimate system can be resisted. Now, expanding on that with European Union Member of Parliament Godfrey Bloom, for those that don't know, can you explain how this unelected bureaucracy circumvented or circumnavigated the checks and balances, how they do this by stealth? Because I've studied it, but I'm not as big an expert, obviously, as you are, being in the European Parliament, for 5 years. Because when studying your system, it's very similar and has the very same people involved that are running our North American Union by stealth. And we're just a few decades behind you, but the process of integration is now accelerated here as it is there. And so by understanding this model, we can then understand how to throw it off, not just in Europe and England, but here in North America as well.
Well, it's extremely difficult, actually, because you, like us, have a two-party system. We have the Conservatives and Labour. You have Republicans and Democrats. It's extremely difficult if the two parties that you have, and that's a sort of democracy that's grown up over the years, you either vote for the Republicans or Democrats over there. We either vote for the Conservative Party or the Labour Party. But what we actually have is the two parties actually agree on the main fundamentals of handing over control to an international political elite. And what we've actually built up over the years is a political elite which is totally and utterly divorced from the will of ordinary people. And so when you go we go into the pub, you go into bars, or we go into the cricket club, you go into the baseball club or whatever, you find that ordinary people don't want any of this, but they've been sidelined by professional politicians. And whereas maybe 200 years ago, certainly in Europe, there was an aristocratic class who ran Europe, now there's a political class, and of course they have complete control over public service broadcasting over here. The BBC is funded and paid for by the same people, and they promulgate the same view that we should be internationally governed. And so it leaves democracy completely behind.
And let's be clear, you have a bureaucracy that sets the policies, and then all the elected parliament that's represented by the different nations, all you can do is basically amend or debate smaller sections. So literally, the once sovereign nations of Europe and England have been turned into vestigial ceremonial offices.
This is quite true, and of course it's totally against our Constitution. What a lot of Americans, and I visit America quite a lot, and I love to do so, they don't fully understand that we do actually have a Constitution in Britain. We do have something called the Bill of Rights, which was formulated in 1688, so it's several hundred years old.
Yeah, you have the Parliament Act, too, don't you? And then even before that, Magna Carta.
We do, and if you go back to 1215, of course, you go quite rightly, Alex, back to Magna Carta. So we've had 1,000 years nearly of developing a parliamentary constitutional democracy under a constitutional monarchy.
That, by the way, for those that don't know, was bought with a lot of blood and a lot of heroics that was then the model for our system here in the United States.
Well, that's quite right. We fought to preserve a constitutional democratic monarchy in many, many wars, and of course, in the last century, alongside the United States as our great ally. And I'm a great believer in the transatlantic alliance between our two nations, because we think alike and we believe in the same things. But the problem with us is that we've discarded our Constitution, and I noticed almost on a yearly basis the same thing is happening to America. You've discarded your Constitution, and we regard, or certainly thinking people over here, regard the American Constitution as one of the greatest documents ever written.